joined by my friend Jay Nightmares. You can follow the link down below or in the end credits to check out his absolutely amazing channel. But for now, it's time to get comfortable and let the darkness take control. This happened when I was about 7 years old in Colorado, during a summer that felt endlessly hot. My dad was known for making spontaneous outdoor plans, especially after he'd been drinking. If there was a river, a camping trip, or some adventure that probably wasn't the safest idea, chances were he would want to do it. He had this restless energy and needed to be moving, to be doing something big, and alcohol seemed to make that need stronger. He would never think about the risks, wouldn't consider what might go wrong. He always just wanted to go. With this in mind, one summer he decided we were going to go tubing on the Platte River. It was a clear morning, the sky was blue, and from where we stood the river looked calm. My cousin Christopher came with us. He was about 6 years older than me, so around 13 at the time. He was taller, stronger, and always the one who made sure everything was okay, and I trusted him completely. I, on the other hand, was not a strong swimmer. In fact, I was sort of scared of water. My parents had never put me in swimming lessons, and I never really enjoyed swimming in the first place. I did enjoy being near water, watching it, feeling its coolness, but being within it was a different story. The sensation of not knowing where up was, of sinking, of being swallowed by it completely terrified me, and I avoided pools, lakes, and anywhere where I might have to submerge myself. When we arrived at the river, we got everything situated. We had 2 tubes, my dad had one to himself, and Christopher and I shared the other. I remember noticing that part of the river included a decent-sized waterfall. Even as a kid, it made me nervous. I could see the water crashing down, the white foam at the bottom, and I knew I didn't want to go near it. It looked dangerous, and my instincts were screaming at me to stay away. My dad went first. He floated down without any problems, reached the shoreline, and started yelling at us to come on down. He was already at the bottom, probably polishing off whatever he had been drinking, and sounded excited. He didn't seem to notice the waterfall, or if he did, he didn't think it was a problem. I remember looking at the waterfall and feeling a pang of unease cross my chest. I told Christopher I wasn't sure about it, and I was hoping he would say we didn't have to go. I wanted him to tell me it was okay to stay back and to walk back up the bank and just to wait for my dad. He reassured me that everything would be okay, that the life jacket would protect me, and the tube would keep us together, and that it wouldn't be that bad. His confidence made me want to believe him, and I trusted him, and I was wearing a life jacket, so eventually I agreed. I clutched the sides of my tube, my hands gripping very hard as I tried to calm myself down. I told myself it would be fine, that Christopher was with me, and that I had many layers of protection. At first, it was actually fun. We floated along the river, laughing and enjoying the ride. The water was cool, the sun was warm, and for a while I had completely forgotten about the waterfall. Then we got ever closer. The sound of the rushing water got louder, and I could feel the current pulling us forward. My hands tightened on the tube again, and the fear started building in my chest like a weight pressing deeply against my heart. I wanted to stop and get off the tube and walk back to the bank, but I had committed. There was no way to do it now, and we were moving too fast in any case. Before I knew it, we were going over. The edge of the waterfall disappeared beneath us, and then we were falling. The second we hit the water below, our tube flipped. I was thrown into the river and immediately sucked under by a force much stronger than anything I have ever experienced. I remember feeling completely helpless. The water was everywhere, in my mouth, in my nose, and absolutely suffocating me. People often mistake thinking that life jackets will make you invisible. But in that moment, it was useless. It was pulling me up, but the current was pulling me down and I couldn't fight both. I couldn't find the surface. I couldn't tell you which direction was up. Everything was a dark jumble of pure chaos. I fought as hard as I could, but every second I was losing. My arms were failing, my legs were kicking, but I couldn't get anywhere. The panic was overwhelming. I was going to drown. I was going to die right there in that river, and my dad was just standing on the shore, probably still drinking. Then, just when I was running out of strength, I felt someone push me upwards. It was Christopher. While I was drowning, he had somehow gotten to me and physically pushed me towards the surface. He must have fought the current too, must have struggled to get to me, but he did it, and risked his own life to save mine. The next thing I remember is breaking through the water and gasping for air. The air was so sharp, so cold, and I couldn't stop coughing. We both eventually made it to the shore, coughing up river water, and I was on my knees, spitting and crying. Christopher was right there with me, exhausted but alive. My entire body was shaking. I was sobbing uncontrollably. I couldn't stop. I was so afraid, relieved, overwhelmed, a whole cocktail of emotions. Christopher put his hand on my back and told me that we were okay. Probably the strangest part is that my dad didn't seem to think it was a big deal. He had been drinking and mostly brushed off the whole thing. He said it was just a little bounce and that we were fine, that we should try it again sometime. He, of course, didn't understand how close I had been to dying. He didn't understand what Christopher had done. But for me, it was a very big deal. I genuinely believe I would have drowned that day if Christopher had not been there. I would have gone under and never returned. And my dad would have just stood there, and no one would have known. My cousin always loved Superman growing up, and to me he became Superman that day. But as for swimming, that's for the fishes. I haven't swum since that day, and I don't think I ever will again. And to everyone, please, respect rivers, wear life jackets, learn to swim, and never underestimate moving water. Rivers are not like lakes or pools. They have currents that you cannot see, forces you cannot fight, and in some places, even hidden caves underneath that will mercilessly pull you into their depths for you to never be seen again. Stay safe out there. From 2008 to 2014, I served as an officer in the United States Marine Corps. I left active duty in 2014 as a captain. My military occupation speciality was 0602, Command and Control Systems Officer, and I was attached first to Marine Wing Communications Squadron 18, then later served briefly as the S6 Staff Officer for the Marine Aircraft Group 36. Back then I was focused on the real enemy. During the surge, most of our training centered on counter-surgency warfare and tactics against improvised explosive devices and vehicle-borne improvised explosive devices. Because of that, I was a skeptic through and through. I had no interest in the paranormal and honestly no experience with it either. I already had more than enough on my plate. Now, Marine Wing Communications Squadron 18 was located at Camp Foster in Okinawa. Anyone familiar with that history knows the Battle of Okinawa during the Second World War was among the bloodiest fights in the Pacific Theater. And even now, unexploded ordnance are still being uncovered. Because of that fighting, there are still places considered off-limits to the public due to the risk of old explosives. As an officer, one of my regular duties was to stand officer of the day, which meant I had a 24-hour post. I carried a loaded pistol, walked the unit perimeter, and kept the logbook, and toured the enlisted barracks to make sure good order and discipline were being maintained. Around 11 p.m. at night, I had just finished my second tour through the headquarters building, where my duty desk was located, and I headed outside to walk towards one of the 3 enlisted barracks. The moment I stepped out, I was hit with an outrageously cold blast of air that had no obvious source. Bear in mind, it was mid-August in Okinawa, which means hot, thick, miserable weather, so getting struck by nearly Arctic air caught me completely off guard. At first, I blamed the air conditioning in the building and kept walking. The base was quiet. Most of the Marines were either asleep or at the smoke pit, getting one last cigarette in before bed. As I walked, though, I became acutely aware of the smell of spent brass. Then it intensified. It was not just the smell of gunpowder. It was the heavy, unmistakable odor you get after hundreds of Marines have just finished firing. You know it the moment you smell it. That pushed me into search mode, and I diverted from my route towards a wooded nearby area where the smell seemed strongest. And that is when I heard a scream. It still haunts me to this day. The best way I can describe it is wet, like someone trying to scream with their mouth full of water. At first, I tried to make sense of it logically. Perhaps it was an animal, maybe one of the giant fruit bats that fly around Okinawa. But the sound came from directly in front of me, inside a small wooded area. I immediately decided it was not an animal. My next thought was that someone was being attacked nearby, so I ran towards the sound, switched on my flashlight, and began searching the area. I looked around every single tree, trying to figure out where it had come from. I searched for about 10 minutes and found nothing, though the smell of spent gunpowder was still strong. Then I turned to walk back towards headquarters so I could call military police and have Marines come and search the area. And that was when I stopped dead in my tracks. Because there in the woods, next to the Shirahai River, not 7 feet in front of me, floating off the ground, was a person-shaped figure, with no distinguishable features. It was completely black, like a shadow, except it was not like the kind of shadow that belongs to anything ordinary. Its legs looked like ragged stumps, which is how I knew it wasn't standing on the ground at all. It seemed to be wearing shredded clothing, but I couldn't make out any color because everything about it was just so black. My flashlight didn't seem to be able to illuminate it properly. Where its head should have been were 2 white eyes that flashed at me, almost like a camera going off. I took several steps back in shock and tripped over a tree root, but never taking my eyes off it. I looked down long enough to reach for my service pistol, and when I looked back up, it was gone. There was absolutely nothing there. I got up and ran as fast as I could back to headquarters, slammed the door shut and locked it. My assistant duty officer, who was usually a lance corporal or corporal assigned to help with the 24-hour post and swap sleep shifts, was asleep. I couldn't even figure out how to tell him what I had just seen without sounding completely insane. I stayed at the duty desk for the rest of the night, terrified and not moving an inch. I do not even think I blinked. I never told anyone about it, and was afraid of what it would do to my career or whether I would be ordered to undergo a mental health evaluation, and I kept it buried from the day I left active duty until now. Since then, I've dealt with night terrors and insomnia, and my health has gotten worse because of it.
I was a landing craft mechanized boatswain in Vietnam in 1966. Our unit was stationed in the city of Quy Nhon, and we operated in and around Quy Nhon Bay, transporting cargo and personnel. Most nights followed the same routine, but there were 2 incidents during that time that I've never forgotten. One night, when I reported to my boat after dark, I immediately noticed something strange about the water in the harbor. At first, I thought it was debris of some kind or an oil slick reflecting on the lights from shore, but as my eyes adjusted, I realized the entire surface of the bay was covered in swimming rats. As far as I could see, the water looked alive. The harbor itself was roughly and poorly constructed, lit mostly by work lights from the loading equipment along the shore. The boats were tied together side by side in clusters, almost like a floating island. Under those lights, the water appeared paved with rats. Thousands upon thousands of them swam across the surface, packed so tightly together that they formed a moving carpet stretching across the harbor. The sound was almost worse than the sight. There was a constant screeching and squealing coming from the water. Some of the rats were trying to climb onto the boats, and many of them attempted to crawl inside through the engine exhaust ports. Every time one of the landing crafts fired up its engine and pulled away, the propellers churned the water and scattered the rats for a moment, opening a gap in the mass. Within seconds, the hole would close again as more rats flooded back into it. The entire thing lasted an hour, and then the tide shifted. Now, Queen Yon Bay has incredibly strong outgoing tides. Once the water started flowing out, the current could move at speeds closer to 15 miles per hour in some areas. The effect on the rats was immediate. The entire swarm was swept out of the harbor almost instantly, almost as if someone had flushed a toilet. One moment the bay was covered with them, and the next they were gone, dragged out into the darkness by the current. I never saw anything like it again during the rest of my tour. Another night while returning to port, I witnessed something else that stayed with me for different reasons. As we approached the harbor, I saw two merchant mariners trying to board a small boat that would take them back out to their ship. Both men were obviously drunk and having trouble keeping their balance near the dock. One of them missed a step and fell into the water. The other man immediately reached out to grab him, lost his footing himself, and went right in after. The tide was going out hard that night. The current in the harbor could pull a man away in seconds, and that's exactly what happened. By the time we reacted, both men had already disappeared into the darkness. I turned the boat around immediately, and we searched the water with our spotlight, but there was nothing to find. There was no shouting or movement or sign of any sign. The current had taken them almost instantly. We never reported it after. That probably sounds cold now, but Vietnam changes the way people react about death. After a while, survival and routine start overriding everything else. Things happened, people disappeared, and life kept moving on because we had to.
On our drill ship, which was built in China, we noticed something strange in the drawings. There was a room that did not seem to have any entrance. We went looking for it but couldn't find a way in. But the spacing made it obvious there was an extra room tucked in there somewhere. Now that might not sound especially creepy, unless you've spent time in shipyards like that, where two things are always on your mind. One is stowaways, though I doubt that was the case here. The other is the sheer number of workers moving around at any given time following orders without question. We confirmed that the room had all 6 sides, but there was not a single weld visible from the outside. That only left one possibility, and I think most people can figure out where it's going. It looked like they had welded the room from the inside and they realized there was no way out once sealed. If the gas had not killed whoever was in there, the trap itself probably did. The feeling around that specific space is heavy, and people say they hear things there, and I definitely have too. This is not some kind of ancient ship. It rode from China to Amsterdam after it was completed, and then on its maiden voyage to America. Whatever happened in that room, it feels like it happened fast.
Near my family home, there's a floodplain. Out in the middle of it, standing on its own, there's a torii gate, which looks like a small shrine. When I was a kid, that floodplain was off limits, but that didn't stop us. I used to sneak in there all the time to catch bugs, pick walnuts, and mess around with my friends. One summer evening, after I had already said goodbye to the friend I'd been playing with, I realized that I'd left my hat behind in the floodplain. It was getting dim, but not fully dark yet, so I went back on my own. I found the hat where I'd left it, right near the base of the torii. I picked it up and turned to head home, and that was when one of my legs suddenly dropped straight down to about my shin. There are places in that floodplain where the ground looks normal, but underneath it's soft and saturated. Kids used to say the deeper spots had no bottom. It sounded like nonsense at the time, but standing there, with one leg sunk in, it didn't really feel like a rumor anymore. I tried to pull my foot out straight away, but that made things worse. As I shifted my weight, the other leg started to sink too. The light was fading quickly. The sky had that deep orange-red tone that signaled dark was approaching fast. I started to panic. My shoes slipped off in the mud. I kept trying to pull myself free, but every movement dragged me deeper or threw me off balance. I remember asking myself why I'd come back. Why hadn't I just left the hat? Then, from behind me, "What are you doing?" I twisted my upper body and looked back, and there was a kid standing there. Bit older than me, maybe around 12. Short hair, neat and playing. He was looking at me like he couldn't quite figure out what I was doing. And the moment I saw him, I felt relief. I started explaining everything all at once. That my legs were stuck, and that I'd come back for the hat, and that I'd been playing here earlier. I don't know why I said all of it. He just listened and then said, "Oh, I see," and held out a hand, and I grabbed it. He pulled me up without any struggle, just like that. By then it was almost dark. I said a quick thank you without thinking, and he didn't reply. He just gave a small nod, then pointed behind me. Toward the fence where the floodplain meets the road, I turned and saw my mum was running towards it. The second I saw her, everything I'd been holding in came out at once. I started crying, and I hobbled towards the fence. My mum grabbed me as soon as I reached her. She pulled me close, then smacked me over the head a couple of times while holding me. I felt how much I had worried her. Then I remembered the kid. I turned back, but there was no one there. Or maybe it was just too dark to see anything. Either way, I didn't really question it at the time. I just assumed he'd gone home. That night, we had pork sauté for dinner with a pineapple on top. The next day, on the way to school, I passed the road beside the floodplain, and I looked over there without thinking. Near the shrine, in the shade of a tree, I saw someone. The same kid. I called out, "Thanks for yesterday," and waved. He turned and waved back. Then a friend came up behind me and pulled my backpack. "What are you doing?" We got distracted, messing around like usual. And when I looked back again, the kid was gone. In fact, after that, I never saw him again, but I didn't forget. As I got older and started reading about some strange stories and local beliefs, I came to think of that kid as something like a guardian of that place, something tied to the land. Years later, I went back to the shrine with a small offering. Part of me wondered if I'd see that kid again, but I didn't. I left the offering and started heading home, and I turned back, and the offering was gone. There was no one there. I didn't hear anything. I mean, nothing to suggest anyone had come close. Still, that was enough. I felt settled. Even now, when I go back to my parents' place, I find myself glancing towards that floodplain. Every so often, I still catch myself looking for that kid.
About the time I was 17, I went out to the beach with a few friends in the middle of the night. We were stupid, rowdy teenagers who thought making dry ice bombs in the sand was a great idea, and there were about 5 or 6 of us out there just messing around near the water. It was a foggy night, which was not unusual at all where I lived on the northwest coast of Oregon. It rains there constantly, so the mist and damp air were just part of the landscape. Well, after about 90 minutes of acting like idiots, we decided to walk further down the beach. We had probably been walking for about 15 minutes when we heard this strange scratching and grinding sound, and all stopped to listen. Not long after that, a tall figure emerged from the fog between us and the ocean. It had to be at least 8 feet tall, and it was dragging a chain behind it. Not a normal chain either, but a huge one that appeared to look like it would belong on an anchor or something equally as massive. The links looked enormous, maybe 8 to 12 inches long, and thick enough that they must have been about an inch in diameter. The chain itself had to have been at least 40, maybe 50 feet long, and this thing was just dragging it through the sand in the middle of the night. All of us went silent. I got the worst shiver down my spine and my hair stood on end. It felt like my breath left my body. We watched it move across our path and head up the beach until both figure and chain faded into the fog. At that point, my only thought was it was creepy as hell. We kept going and eventually made it down to the Peter Irrendale shipwreck, which is mostly eroded now. We hung out there for a bit, listened to the ocean, and tossed a couple more dry ice bombs into the water before going back to our car, which was parked about half a mile up the shore. On the way back, we heard the same grinding sound again. My heart dropped. I knew immediately it was the thing with the chain. It was dragging its way up the beach in the exact same area we had seen it before. There were no drag marks leading up to it, no footprints or any sign that it had been there beforehand. The sand was dry and untouched by the waves. There was nothing in front of us that could explain what it was we were seeing. We of course stood there dumbfounded for a moment, watching it trudge forward with that massive chain behind it. But then it stopped, turned, and looked right at us. Whatever that thing was, its stare felt like it went straight through me. We all just stood there frozen, staring back at this shadowy spectre. And then, it started moving towards us. That was enough for us. We took off running through the sand as fast as we could. I do not think I have ever run that fast in my life. We piled into the car, my friend turned the engine over, and we absolutely floored it out of there, easily hitting 80 on the straight stretch of access road. I kept staring back out the window the whole time, half expecting it to come after us like something out of a bad nightmare, but fortunately, it never did, and I never saw the figure again. It was easily one of the strangest and most terrifying experiences I have ever witnessed. None of us were on drugs. We were all completely sober. And a week or so later, a friend who had not been there that night told me people used to practice black magic in the dunes there, and there was supposed to be an artifact of demonology and inverted crosses scattered around. I called nonsense at first, but then I asked his mum about it, and she said she had heard similar stories too. We found some inverted crosses made out of rusted metal, along with a few concrete blocks that were probably about a cubic meter in size. They had holes bored through them with metal rings inserted almost like anchor points. After seeing those, I put two and two together and started thinking the chain might have once been connected to those blocks for some purpose I don't even want to know about. Whatever that thing was, I never wanted to see it again, and never set foot in those cursed dunes after that experience.
I've dived a lot of wrecks throughout the Pacific and Red Sea, many of them, like the Yongala, and some of the World War II wrecks, sank with the loss of lives on board. But I've only ever had two experiences that were at all odd. The first one was on the descent to a World War II Japanese wreck in Micronesia. I think it was in Palau. As I was going down, I thought I heard a voice shout loudly in my ear. Reefs and wrecks can be noisy places, and with the sound distortion it could have been something in the surrounding environment. But it sounded very vaguely like someone shouting very clearly and distinctly in a foreign language right next to my head, and not as if they were underwater. On another trip in the Solomon Islands, we were doing a muck dive at a former World War II Japan supply landing site. There was a lot of debris scattered around, up to and including plane wings, but I was more interested in looking for mandarin gobies. It was very shallow water, under 10 meters, more like 5 meters if I'm honest, so we were solo diving and hopping off the live board all afternoon, and I didn't have a buddy with me. It's so long ago I have to dig up old archive logs to relate exactly what I felt and heard that made me feel so uneasy. But the whole location felt eerie. I never felt alone, and there were sounds that didn't feel like they were your usual underwater background noise. But I would have forgotten about it or chalked it up to imagination if I hadn't have happened to read an article in an Australian dive magazine many months later that described a dive at the same location. Apparently, they had the same experience, with individual divers comparing notes on the site after some left the water early because they felt uneasy. All of this is easily explained by background distorted noise and the psychological impact of diving in areas surrounded by the detritus of terrible war. But in all the sites I've dived, these are the only 2 times I've had anything like a strange experience. I'm also generally familiar with typical sounds during a dive, and I know that those weren't a part of them.
This happened roughly 30 years ago, and it's something that I've only told a few select people about, up until now. It happened one night to me and my girlfriend. That night we drove to the beach. After work I went to pick her up and we headed straight to the beach. However, when we arrived, the beach was already pitch black. I mean, we should have known better, not to go so late, but for some reason we really wanted to go that night after work. It was roughly about 10 p.m. by the time we got out of my car. While we were talking in the car, eating our McDonald's, we had stopped to get along the way, looking out at the darkness. At least we could still see the waves rolling against the beach, and that was well worth the drive, I suppose. "I can't stay out too long, I have work early in the morning," I said to my girlfriend. She didn't respond. I thought that she might have been annoyed at me for saying I had to leave so soon, so I looked over to her, and I noticed that she seemed to be transfixed on something out at sea. "What is it?" I asked her. She didn't answer. So I looked in the direction she was looking, and I saw a strong beam of light swaying across the waves far from the shoreline. "Is that a squid fishing boat or something?" "I don't know," I said to her. "That's not a squid fishing boat. The light isn't right. Hey, don't you think it's getting closer?" I looked out at sea, and I agreed that the bright light seemed to be getting closer. It was shaking as it moved along the waves. It looked as if it was heading right for the shore. Maybe it's a fireball. Hi, Jay here. Fireballs are like will-o'-the-wisp kind of paranormal phenomenon in Japan. Visually a little like an orb or something like that. These balls of fire appear at night and are said to be souls that have been separated from their earthbound bodies. Back to the story. If it was a fireball, then it wouldn't shine so bright, surely. No, that is 100% a UFO. She said it so excitedly, I was kind of taken aback. I didn't know until that point that she had an interest in the paranormal or the occult. I looked at the mysterious light a little closer, and she was right. It wasn't flickering kind of dim light you might expect to see when you think of these fireballs. It was a strong, bright searchlight shining down at the waves. I heard myself absent-mindedly agreeing with her by saying, "Well, yeah, I guess it could be a UFO." At this point, the light was only about 200 to 300 meters away from us. That might sound a little strange, so let me just say that the beach we drove to was a very secluded one. The shore wasn't that far away from where you could park. We liked this beach because there was never anyone around at night, and there wasn't much light in the area. It was perfect for a nice, secluded evening date. As the light of what we thought was a UFO approached, I noted that I wasn't scared. I just thought to myself, wow, you know what, this could be a UFO, and this is a once-of-a-lifetime kind of deal. My girlfriend then said, "Hey, isn't that light getting to the shoreline now?" And yeah, it was. I snapped out of that state of awe and began to panic a little. I saw the light go over the waves at the shore, and I knew it was about to illuminate the sand on the beach next. The gravity of the situation set in for me. "Put your seatbelt on. We gotta get out of here." I started the ignition, and I pulled a U-turn and drove out of the beach area at breakneck speed. As I drove, my girlfriend continued to stare at the light. I heard her call out in a frightened voice, "That light is shining right where we were parked up." I was really panicking. I was driving for our lives. I felt like a rally driver at one point as I drifted onto the sand. Finally, we made it back onto roads, which were well lit, and a sense of security we lost down by the shore slowly came back to us. I pulled over, and I remember I had goosebumps all over my arms. And when I took my hands off the steering wheel, I noticed that they were drenched in sweat. We spent the rest of the journey in a hushed silence. I think neither of us knew what to say to comfort the other. If she was anything like me, then she was replaying it over and over in her head. That weird overhead light advancing on us, it was headed straight for us. I dropped her off at her place, and when I got back to mine, I just laid down on my bed. I was there wondering if what happened truly happened, or if it was some kind of dream. I met my girlfriend the following night, and I asked her outright, "That wasn't a dream, was it?" "No, of course not. I was there with you," she said. She seemed a little skeptical that day. I don't know how to describe it. "I wonder what that was," she asked rhetorically. Last night she had been so sure that it was a UFO, but now she was questioning herself, it seemed. Of course, I didn't know what it was myself, so I didn't have any form of answer for her. Well, that's where it sort of ended, I guess. And one thing I can tell you is I ended up marrying that girlfriend. And 20 years on from that night, at that beach, the memory of the strange bright overhead searchlight had faded away. Until one evening when we were watching a TV show about Japanese nationals' abduction cases. For those unaware, there are a large number of missing person cases tied to North Korea. Approximately 470 people have been abducted. And according to the Japanese government, as of November 2021, abduction cannot be ruled out for a further 873 individuals. Now, during this TV show, they showed a map which had all the locations where they believed that the abductees were captured and kidnapped. What did we see on that map? Well, none other than that secluded beach we drove to that night 20-something years ago. I looked at my wife, and she was staring at the TV stunned. We did not encounter a UFO that night. We likely encountered a North Korean ship coming to shore that could have easily seen us pull in and park up. I felt a chill race down my spine when I realized that we could have ended up as kidnap victims. If I didn't drive off when I did, we could have been abducted. Since that day, whenever North Korea appears in the news, I think to myself how lucky I am to live the peaceful life I have with my wife. The realization that it wasn't a UFO, but people with evil intentions was hands down the scariest moment of my life.
I worked as a boat captain around the Miami area for several years, and I've spent most of my life out on the water recreationally as well. People who don't spend time offshore tend to imagine the ocean as peaceful or empty, but the reality is that strange and unsettling things happen there constantly. Being that close to Cuba, it wasn't unusual to occasionally come across Cuban rafts or makeshift boats. People would build anything they could out of scraps, wood, barrels, you name it, in an attempt to reach Florida. Sometimes you'd see them drifting offshore or being intercepted by the Coast Guard. It happened often enough that most captains in the area were used to it. The unsettling part was finding the ones that clearly were never intercepted. When the United States Coast Guard recovers one of those rafts, they usually mark it somehow before destroying it, either burning it, sinking it, or painting it, so other boats know it's already been processed. Over time, you learn to recognize those markings immediately. But every once in a while you'll encounter one that had none of them. Just an empty raft, drifting silently offshore. And when you see something like that, your mind fills in the blanks, whether you want to or not. Because somewhere between Cuba and Florida, something happened to the people who built that raft and trusted it with their lives. Maybe they went overboard. Maybe the weather turned. Maybe the boat failed. Maybe they were there for days before the water took them. In truth, you never really knew. But seeing those empty rafts drifting out there alone in open water always gave me a sick feeling. There was one incident that really stayed with me. It happened during a weekday run offshore when there weren't many other boats around. We were heading south in an extremely strong northbound current, probably 2 to 3 knots, which is serious current when you're in the water. And that's when we spotted a diver. At first glance, it looked like someone just swimming offshore, but something immediately troubled me. He was desperately trying to swim south against the current and getting nowhere. Every few strokes he'd lose more ground and drift further north. Even from a distance you can tell he was exhausted and panicking. We got closer and realized he was miles away from his chartered dive boat. The current had separated him completely. He drifted at least 2 to 3 miles away at that point, and the worst part was that when we finally reached the charter boat and told them, they hadn't even realized he was missing yet. That part honestly stunned me. Eventually, they probably would have done a head count and figured it out. But by then, who knows how far offshore he would have drifted. A strong current can move a person shockingly fast, especially if they're tired and fighting against it instead of conserving energy. I still think there's a good chance we saved his life that day, and didn't meet the same fate as those poor Cubans. Over the years, I've seen all kinds of things offshore. I've watched a small recreational plane crash directly into the ocean, which is something you never forget. Thankfully, everyone aboard survived that one. I've seen boat fires burning so hot you could feel the heat from hundreds of feet away, sinking vessels disappearing stern first into the black water, and drug smuggling operations getting intercepted. Even helicopters pursuing vessels offshore at night. I think it's important people remember that the ocean is one of the strangest and most unforgiving places on our Earth.
Back in September, my grandmother's older sister passed away. We called her Oba, even though she technically was my great aunt. Everyone in the family did. She was the oldest living relative we had left, and for whatever reason, the women in my dad's side of the family always seemed to hold more authority than anyone else. Because of that, the funeral ended up pulling in relatives I'd never seen or heard of before. We traveled out and stayed overnight for the wake and funeral. There was one person I was hoping to see. A cousin, Shuji. We were almost the same age, and when we were kids, he was the only one in the family I could really spend any time with. Everyone else was either too young, too old, or just not interested. If I was going to see him again, it would be the first time in about 15 years. But at the wake, only his parents and his older sister showed up. Shuji wasn't there, and for some reason, seeing that brought something back. A memory I hadn't thought about in years. On my dad's side, things were always a bit unusual. The family line didn't pass down to the eldest son, but to the eldest daughter instead. Most of the relatives still lived along the sea of Japan's coast, and in the same region where Oba's house was. My dad was the third son, so he left, moved to Osaka. We grew up pretty detached from all of that. Shuji's family was similar. They lived in Kanagawa, not part of the day-to-day customs, just like us. Every summer, around Obon, the whole family would gather at Oba's house. We'd stay there for several days, visiting graves, going to local festivals, eating together. Her house sat close to the sea, not right on it, but just beyond the road. You could see it. Close enough that the smell of salt carried on the wind. When we were kids, Shuji and I would spend most of our day down there, running around the shore, throwing stones, getting yelled at for going too far out. That memory that came back was from winter. I was maybe in the second or third year of primary school. There had been another funeral at Oba's house. I think it was her husband who had passed away. Just like this time, we stayed overnight for the wake and the funeral, and Shuji's family was there too. At that age, I didn't really understand funerals. I wasn't thinking about death or loss or anything like that. All I cared about was the fact that Shuji was there, that I'd have someone to play with. We arrived in the morning, ate, and then the wake started. I don't remember much about it, to be honest, except how dull it felt. Sitting still, not being allowed to talk, no chance of going outside. But when it came time to go to sleep, there was a separate building out the back where people usually stayed. At that time, it was full, so we all slept in the main house. At dinner, I remember one of the relatives muttering under their breath, "Of all the days to die." It stuck with me, though I didn't really understand why. The next morning I woke up early, around 6. The house was already busy. Oba, my grandmother, and a few others were moving quickly, setting things up around the entrance. They were hanging these small woven baskets, like something made of thin wood, outside. From each one dangled strips of paper with writing on them. These things were being hung everywhere, doors, windows, anywhere that opened outside. I got curious and started tapping one of them, watching it swing. That's when my dad hit me across the head hard. Not angry, more like immediate. I touched something that I wasn't supposed to. After that, they all started shutting everything. Wooden shutters were being pulled closed. Any window without one was being covered in thick paper, pinned over its frame. At the time, I thought it was just something people did when someone died, some kind of custom I hadn't had any experience with. The funeral itself passed by in a blur. By early afternoon, most of it was done. I remember eating lunch, but nobody really spoke. One by one, the relatives left, cars pulling away, the house growing quieter. By evening, it was just our family and Shuji's. I expected things to loosen up. Maybe we'd all sit together, talk, and eat properly. But even talking quietly with Shuji just got us told off. Be quiet. I asked to turn the TV on, got told off again. Just stay quiet. Thinking back on it now, none of the adults were talking either. Only the occasional quick mutter to each other. We got bored, so we decided to go out, just to look at the sea. We were at the entrance putting our shoes on, when my grandmother came rushing over. She didn't say anything at first, she just grabbed me and dragged me back inside. Shuji's dad was already in the dining room. The two of them stood there, serious in a way I'd never seen before. Don't go outside today, stay upstairs. No explanation, no room for arguing. We ended up in one of the upstairs rooms, playing Othello. At some point I must have fallen asleep, and when I woke up it was cold. As I went downstairs I noticed a smell. It wasn't like a strong smell, or the smell of something rotten. It was like fish, but not fresh, not like a harbor market, like something heavier, damp and clinging. The living room was quiet. Oba was reading a newspaper, so were my parents. No one spoke. The silence felt so weird, and after using the toilet, I ran into Shuji in the hallway. He leaned in slightly and whispered, "They say someone's coming tonight." Apparently, he'd overheard the adults earlier. Something was coming. We wanted to check, but every window upstairs was covered, but then I remembered the small toilet window. Frosted glass, no shutter. It faced the sea. The two of us went in together. It was freezing in there. You could see the condensation on the tiles, and we spoke quietly. "Do you really think something's out there?" "They said there is." The window was too high to look through properly, so I climbed up using the water pipe behind the toilet. Careful not to make noise, I slid the window open just enough to see out. The baskets outside were swaying under the eaves. Beyond that, something stretched from the road towards the house. At first I couldn't make any sense of it. It was just a long shape, long and thin. But it was moving, slowly, coming closer. I watched it for about 10 seconds. That was enough. Something about it made my body react before my thoughts could catch up. I shut the window. "There's something there." "What is it?" "I don't know, but it's coming this way." Shuji said that he wanted to have a look. I told him that we should go back. My voice didn't sound right, I could hear it. Tight and uneasy. He pulled away and climbed up, opened the window, looked out, and stayed like that. "Shuji, that's enough. Let's go back." "Hey, that..." He didn't finish. His voice changed. A small, strained sound. "Hit. Hit." Then I heard something behind me. "What are you doing?" Shuji's dad was standing there. His expression wasn't anger, it was something entirely different. I didn't even get a chance to speak. He grabbed me by the collar and threw me out into the hallway. A second later, Shuji was thrown out too. The door slammed shut behind us and adults rushed in. Oba grabbed me. "Did you see it?" Her voice was shaking. "Did you see its face?" I shook my head. I couldn't see properly. It was dark. I stopped looking. Behind me, they were blocking the toilet door, dragging something heavy in front of it. Shuji's dad grabbed him. "Shuji, what did you see?" Shuji was smiling, or trying to. His face was stiff, tight, like it didn't belong to him properly. A strange sound kept coming out of him. He. No one spoke for a moment. That silence, in that dim hallway, was worse than anything. They took him away, towards the back room. Oba was on the phone. Everybody else looked pale. I was taken upstairs, stripped, changed, put straight to bed. Don't leave this room. That's all I was told. And from the other side of the sliding door, I could hear something. Short chants, over and over. That night, my parents stayed with me. I didn't sleep properly though. I just stayed under the covers, holding on to them. My hands and my feet felt cold the entire time. By morning, Shuji was gone. They told me he had a fever, that he'd gone to the hospital. And when I left the room, I noticed something. One of those baskets was hanging outside my door. We left not long after. Before going, Oba said, "You did something very foolish." That night after we got home, I came down with a fever. After that, I wasn't taken back there again. Not for years. When I was in the second year of middle school, I went once more. My family had gathered again, but Shuji wasn't there. He's busy with summer classes, that's what his mum said. Then this September, at Oba's funeral, I overheard something. Somebody said, "Well, Shuji, he never really recovered." I don't know what he saw. I don't even fully understand what I saw. I asked my dad about it later, and he said only one thing. "There are days you're not supposed to look at the sea, son."
I am a fisherman, recreationally, and I've also fished commercially when I was younger. Lots of creepy things have happened out on the open water, and I want to share a few. The first one was the time we got caught in some sort of electrical storm back when I was working an inshore dragger, out on a dead calm day in thick pea soup fog. I'm out working on deck when all of a sudden the air just starts to feel different. I don't really know how to describe it exactly. Just like the air had a sensation to it. And I actually started to hear a faint buzzing in my ear. At the same time I'm becoming aware of this, the captain comes out of the wheelhouse laughing. I look over and the hair on his head is standing on end, like if someone just rubbed a balloon all over it. He points to me, and I realize my hair is standing on end as well. We laugh about it, and then it occurs to us that there's probably a goddamn imminent lightning strike coming, and we both take cover in the wheelhouse. No lightning ever struck though. I guess the front just moved on and things kinda went back to normal after 10 minutes, so we just resumed our work. The second one is probably the only paranormal thing I've ever experienced. Night fishing with my wife and a female friend on a local river and watching a meteor shower, just chilling, drinking and fishing. I decide I wanted to check out a spot further downriver, so I leave them behind and head off into the woods. I'm about 100 yards or so down the path, all alone, just me and the crickets, when I hear a female voice say my name. Loud, plain as day, like someone was standing just a few feet behind me and trying to grab my attention. I turn around thinking one of the girls followed me into the woods, but no one is there. I am not really a huge believer in the supernatural or anything, but this absolutely freaked the hell out of me. So I just immediately head back, and sure enough, they're still hanging out on the riverbank watching the meteor shower. There is absolutely no way I could have heard them that clearly from that far away. I told them what happened, and they still to this day think I was just messing with them and trying to frighten them. But I'm telling you, I still get the willies thinking about it, and the fact I've never been back to that spot since.
This story happened from when I was working on a ship. One night we were sailing through Alaskan waters, and it happened to be my first time ever seeing the Northern Lights. I could honestly not get over how incredible it was. The sky was so bright, it almost resembled dusk, and we could see clearly for miles. A few buddies and I went up to the roof, or what we called the Lido deck, at around 1 AM just to watch it. After a while, there were about 6 of us up there, and before long it was almost the entire crew. That is when a huge, white spotlight suddenly shined right at us. We were close to land, but the light was above the water, not low enough to be coming from another ship. It was also very high up. It stayed on us for about 15 to 20 seconds, and when it finally shut off, we all looked around trying to figure out what it was. But there was nothing there, no aircraft or visible source. A few minutes later, the lights shone on us again, only this time it was on the other side of the vessel above the mountains. Again, there was no way to tell what it was. We all saw it. None of us had ever seen or heard an aircraft hovering those waters like that, especially at 2 a.m. We never figured out what it was. Our best guess was that it might have been some kind of quiet military aircraft doing drills or something, but no one really knows. Either way, it was one of the strangest things I have ever experienced in the ocean. My husband and I saw something over the Gulf of Mexico back in 2015 that we still cannot explain. At first, we thought it was just a shooting star, but then it started changing colors, cycling through nearly every color we could imagine. What made this even stranger was its trajectory. It shot up, down, and forward, and almost straight towards us while we were standing on the beach, and then it suddenly zipped back out to the horizon. One moment it seemed incredibly far away, and the next it was right on top of us. Then, in what felt like an instant, it was many miles away again. The distance this aircraft, or whatever it is, covered in such a short amount of time was honestly mind-blowing. We kept going back to the same spot for weeks afterwards, hoping to see it again, but we never did. We saw plenty of strange things over the Gulf, but that one stood out the most. It felt like there was some kind of intelligence behind it, especially because of how it seemed to react and move with purpose. At first, we assumed it had to be a drone, but once we saw it retreat so far and then appear right in front of us again almost instantly, that explanation had to be discarded, because no drone at the time could have moved like that, and it wasn't just the speed. It was the fact that it kept changing color as it moved. It was one of the most unusual things I've ever seen out over deep water. Hey guys, it's Mort here, and thank you so much for listening. I hope you have enjoyed tonight's collection of scary stories, and if of course you have, you can let me know down below. Huge thank you as always to Jay Nightmares for providing me these absolutely stellar stories. If you enjoyed the stories as much as I did, be sure to show him some love, go over to his channel and subscribe. He is the purveyor of some fantastic stories from Japan. The link can be seen on screen now or down below. I would like to give one final thank you, of course, as always, to my amazing members and patrons whose names can be seen on screen. And if you would like to join their ranks to get some cool exclusive stories over on these platforms, follow the links down below to find out more. But that's it from me. Until next time, guys, stay awesome and good night.